we go. Alrighty, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty. So I'm Covey, and I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about geothermal energy and how they are used in building systems today. I've really looked into it like the past few years, and I find like geothermal heat pumps stuff to be very interesting. So I just want to do my presentation on that. So first, before we talk about how it's used in buildings, it's a good idea to just discuss in general what is geothermal energy exactly. And geothermal energy is renewable energy that is basically stored and generated from deep underground. To be more exact, it's heat energy from underground, particularly like near the mantle and the core, like how you have the different structures of the earth, and it's just energy that's collected from underground, deep underground near the core and mantle. It's much more reliable and cost efficient versus it's much more reliable and cost efficient method of extracting energy compared to other energy sources like wind or water or even just conventional energy that most people use. And it's used in many applications today, such as heating and water heating. So how does it work? As you can see by the diagram here, basically cool water is injected into the ground, or it already collects the groundwater that is underground, and then it basically pumps up this water or energy from underground and heats it up, and then it's used to produce steam here, as you in the generators you can see there. Here are some more diagrams of power plants. Some of them have slightly different processes, but it's all basically the same idea. Kind of the brief background on it. It's been used for many years. As early as the 3rd century BC, in China, they used to use like hot spring pools for bathing or for keeping their heating, for keeping their floors and ground heated. This is considered probably the earliest known use of geothermal power, but there are records of it being used in probably some biblical times too. The oldest heating district in the world was used in France, which has been around since the late 15th century, and the earliest industrial extraction began around 1827 with in Italy, where they used geyser stream to extract boric acid from volcanic material that's found there. And the first known building in the world was the La Grande or Hot Lake Hotel in Oregon, which I know has been in a few movies. It was the first one to use geothermal heat. Some pictures of hot springs, which is where a lot of places, especially like up in Arctic regions, Iceland, Greenland, they collect their geothermal power from there. You can see the steam coming up, so that means the water is very hot. So some of them are comfortable enough to actually go swimming in, but a lot of them are like literally boiling hot, 200 degrees. And there have been stupid people who have jumped in there and have gotten killed or seriously burned from it. So I don't recommend going swimming. So how and what is it used for in buildings? As I mentioned, it's used in many applications, including heat pumps, HVAC systems, and water heaters. And it's much more efficient than traditional HVAC systems and other heating systems too, which I will touch on more in a little bit. So how the heat pump works, basically it just runs on thermal energy from underground instead of from up in the air like most traditional systems use. It basically collects the moisture or water energy from underneath, and it's sent to an extractor where the energy is turned into air, and then it circulates the energy throughout the building while it returns the air from inside back underground. Energy in most places, it can be collected down to as deep as 400 feet underground, where temperatures generally stay around the same temperature in most areas. Like, outside the air, temperature fluctuates a lot as you go up into the atmosphere, but as you go underground, until you're around the mantle layer, temperatures usually stay the same, around 50 degrees or so. So the parts of the system are the outdoor heat pump, which is connected to fields and pipes which we use to pump the groundwater from underground. A series of ductwork, which is run throughout the building, and then 2 evaporators, one that collects the energy, or one that distributes, sends the energy around the building, and then one that collects the temperature, the heat from inside and sends it back outside and underground. Here's another diagram for heat pumps. It's like a industrial setting right here. So you got multiple heat pumps out here, and you see they all run on the same generator system here. And another picture of how it runs in a home. Heating mode versus cooling mode. Most places, especially up north, they use it mostly for heating. And when it's used in the winter, the heating, it absorbs moisture from underground, and it's sent into the evaporator inside where the water is evaporated and turned into air, and then it's sent into the vents system, which sends the warm air throughout the building, while it collects the sinking cold air to be condensed back in water, and then it's returned back underground, and then that water can basically be recirculated into air again. If you used it for air conditioning, this process is basically the other way around. The warm air that is rising inside the building is collected from inside. It's sucked through the vents and it's sent into the system where it's, again, recirculated back in as cold air. Another picture of that. So there are different type of loops that are used, or seal barriers. You have the horizontal loop, which if you're in a situation like out in the country where there's plenty of space, the sealed piping is buried in small trenches from about 3 to 6 feet deep. These usually aren't really the best ones because they're not super deep. It's usually where, as I said, if you're kind of out in the boonies or out in the middle of nowhere, and that's probably the best option for that, so you don't have to go super deep. The vertical loop is the most common one. That's where space is limited, and the pipes are dug in small holes ranging as deep as 400 feet. As I've said before, the system collects energy from as deep as 400 feet, so it'd be best to dig as far down as you can so you get the most energy out of it as you can. If you're near a body of water like a lake or a pond or even a river, you can use the lake or pond loop, which directly collects the water from that and use that in the system. And then a well water or open loop, which works the same way as a well. It just sends pipes down down underground and collects the water from there. If like the water table is high, like in Florida, you can use that there. Open loop versus closed loop. So open loop systems, as I just said, it collects groundwater that is directly underneath. If the water table is super high, then you can just collect the waters directly underneath without digging super deep. So think of a well. Most systems, though, are closed loop, where pipes and tubes are used to collect the water from deep underground, like up to 400 feet, and it's pumped to the system. And this includes systems that are collected from a lake or pond nearby. Those are usually also closed loop, despite it being a body of water nearby. The closed loop systems are available in a variety of patterns, including just regular vertical or horizontal, which we see here. And lots of other cool patterns too, like the spiral or slinky, or just a deep trenched or a two-way. Another major difference that I found between these two are that open loops usually run only one way. Like it simply collects the energy from underground and sends it throughout the building, but it doesn't necessarily collect any indoor conditions and recirculates it back to the ground, whereas closed loop does recirculate, much like a conventional system. So water heaters are typically attached to the HVAC system, where they do share some of the same heat energy, and some of the groundwater that is collected from the heat pump outside is sent to the water heater. And for a geothermal water heater, you have different layers of water inside. You have the cooler water, which is stored around the bottom of the tank, and it's usually around 55 degrees. And towards the top layer, there's the warm water, which is warmed even further when you go to your sink or whatever, and you turn on the hot water, and then the heat from the heat extractor is sent in here, and then the cooler water at the bottom is cooled further, so it warms up the heat water at the top. And standard temperature for hot water is usually 120 degrees, but some systems may have a thermostat to adjust that. Another diagram. Oh yeah, some systems do have two tanks. Sometimes there is a separate tank for preheated water, but typically you only have one tank for that. As I've said, bottom layer cold water and hot water at the top. The cold water at the bottom can be cooled down even further. Thermodynamics, which heats it up at the top. Basically, how the heating cycle goes in the water heater: as the water is heated up and it's sent to the receptacle, the sink, or water vapor, which is formed by high pressure within the pipe system. Plumbing gets returned to the tank, and then it's cooled down, condensed again, and the cycle continues. As you can see, it's a little more complicated than that, actually, but that's just the basics of it. So compared to conventional systems it's far more efficient, both by cost and energy, than regular ones, especially in areas of more extreme climates, particularly in Arctic regions. Like, as I've said, Iceland's a pretty popular country that's known for using geothermal energy. You can reduce up to 75% on energy costs each month, and save potentially up to 80% on energy usage compared to a standard conventional or propane or oil run heat pumps. And you can spend an average of just under $2,000 annually on your utility bills. Yeah, another bar chart that compares it to other types, like standard efficiency gas or propane, high efficiency gas. Like, see how inefficient they can be for heating, especially in geothermal. It is one of the most efficient, only after a water furnace invention, which I'm not too familiar with the water furnace inventions, if anybody else knows how it works, but it looks interesting. This chart shows basically geothermal energy can be extracted anywhere, but in areas where it's orange or red here out west, it may not be as efficient just due to the arid climate and lack of groundwater. But it could potentially be used anywhere because the energy is extracted from deep underground. But it just shows like the diagram of the different ground temperatures in the area and the availability of groundwater. In addition to being energy efficient, geothermal heat pumps are also very minimal in the carbon dioxide they emit compared to other types. Coal in particular emits lots of carbon dioxide, so geothermal is not as bad on the atmosphere because it doesn't rely on the atmosphere for air. It usually extracts from underground. Typical costs. The costs have a wide variety of factors, but it can range anywhere from only about $10,000 to as much as $30,000. But typically, you can expect to look around $23,000-ish for an average installation cost. But I've said there are a variety of factors, like whether you use an open loop system or a closed loop system, or how deep you're digging the trenches, or the availability of your groundwater, or if there's another body of water nearby, or just a general location or the local economy where you're at. That can play too. Installation can take up to several weeks to complete, depending on how deep you have to dig it, especially with larger commercial projects. I know most geothermal heat pumps are probably used in like commercial buildings or industrial buildings. But all this will pay, it does pay off very soon. Like even if you spend that 30 grand on the heat pump, it will pay off much quicker than a traditional system would. Like you spend just $2,000 on your utilities. A couple other things I thought were interesting. You can use geothermal power for swimming pools. I know this is, I think this is from a place like in Alaska or somewhere up in northern Canada, where geothermal energy, it's basically collected from underground, is sent to a pump system, which then via a thermostat or a water heater, it's used to heat up the water inside the pool, so you can comfortably swim at that. Some pools may even be built directly from like a hot spring or another groundwater source where, again, a thermostat is used to control the temperature of that, so it's not too dangerous or go swimming in. People have also cooked using geothermal energy, like the stove or grill right here that was built from geothermal power that's just underneath the surface. I really thought this was interesting. Like, I can't tell what that is on there, but it really looks really interesting. And I know a lot of, and many like less developed countries or in old times, they really used to cook with geothermal. So I really thought that was interesting. All right, so to wrap it up, why would you build geothermal? It comes from a renewable natural resource, and that is the heat energy that is underneath the Earth's surface that has little effect on our atmosphere, and it's not limited like many other resources, and it uses it to its advantage without intoxicating the air around it. Help produce a cheaper, comfortable, and more sustainable way of living. The pros, it is, again, by far one of the most efficient methods out there for heating and cooling. It does pay off in the long run, and most people say it does do a pretty good job at maintaining a consistent temperature inside both day and night and all year long, while running less often than a regular system would. It saves both water and electricity, and it can last up to 50 years, much longer than a conventional HVAC system would potentially. The cons, of course, it is very expensive and difficult to install. It can also be very time consuming. It's mostly used for commercial and industrial settings, especially like in factories or power plants, as opposed to smaller buildings like your house, but it can be used for your house. It's just mostly used for factories and stuff. It may not be as effective in some regions, depending on what the climate or how hilly or flat it may be in an area or what type of soil an area has. Your repairs and maintenance might be difficult if you ever having to come across repairing it. And potentially anything from underneath the ground may also enter the system, or anything that's underneath a underwater lake, it could also potentially enter the system, which could mess it up and affect indoor air quality, but that's usually not an issue. So basically, I personally would definitely love to install geothermal energy. I think it's geothermal heat pump. I think it's very interesting how it works. And I think it would be very much better option to a traditional HVAC system. So, I guess that about wraps it up.
Good. Hey, questions, anybody?
I was just going to say, you take this and marry it with the SIPs, you got a perfect house.
Yeah, I just wanted to
I like that idea.
The Envision heater. The only difference is it uses 2 compressors, and that's mainly for homes that have like a heated floor and you know, want to have hot water at the same time. It's more expensive to install, but over time it will save money, but only really if you have a heated floor and, you know, also need your hot water.
And that was for
Like
the
I said-
infusion system?
Like I said, it is used like mostly in commercial buildings or power plants. So that's why they have 2 evaporators. So it's large enough to send throughout the whole facility. Yeah, if you use it at home too, then it has the same setup basically, just on a much smaller scale.
Covey, I'm most familiar with the sealed loop systems, and in that situation, you know, the fluid in the tubes is not exchanged at all with groundwater. You just have a conductive heat transfer between the fluid that's in the tubes with the soil around the tubes. I'm really unfamiliar with these unsealed systems that actually use groundwater and bring groundwater through the house. I'm wondering if you had any other information. That's the way it looked like you were presenting that was that there was moisture from the ground that was then being brought through the house. I was just wondering if there was some more detail there, because I'm used to the idea of the thermal transfer happening from the ground to the water in the pipes, but not the idea of bringing groundwater through a house.
Are you talking about like the open loop system?
Yeah, where you had an open loop system that, you know, the diagram I guess showed it going to a pond or going down to groundwater.
It's not as common, but I've read somewhere that they use it like in Florida or some coastal location where like the water table is super high, because, you know, if you like just look right underneath the ground, that's literally like just some groundwater right there. Like I know my family who lives down in Florida, they've like tried digging underground and they like just came right across groundwater that was like maybe 20 feet underground. So that's where that would come in. So you could use that there.
Yeah,
But most of the
I've seen
time
ideas
it's sealed up. So
with you know, that I've seen ideas with our artesian wells that pump on their own. I'm imagining something like that, but I guess I was just interested with the idea that you could actually create a loop inside the house with the moisture from the groundwater itself. I'm not familiar with that. Is there any other considerations you'd have to take into account for that? Like your intakes on that? I guess your last slide showed a con of bringing outdoor pollutants in with the water.
water pollutants or any decaying material that might be underground, but that's usually not an issue. That's just something.
Did you see anything, any sort of details on systems like that as far as their intake and, you know, kind of considerations you have to do with that system?
The open loop?
Yeah, I'm just really intrigued by that idea, I guess, because I've done a lot of sealed systems where, you know, it's just like a outdoor heat exchanger on a heat pump. You're just exchanging the heat between the fluid and the ground, not actually bringing the moisture from outside into the house.
I would think it would probably be a little easier to install actually than a traditional sealed system, because if the water is just right there, you don't have to dig super deep. I think that's usually on the cheaper side of installing it too.
I'm imagining that most of the time you'd still need to have a pump or something that was siphoning or bringing groundwater up and into your piping systems.
Just think of how a well works. You know, you take the bucket underground and it just collects water, then it sends it back up. It's basically kind of the same idea there. It just,
yeah, I would have familiar with that idea.
You have a pump that just goes straight, or not a pump.
I want to interject in here. I want to share something with you. So if you've ever been to Old Faithful, there's a hotel right beside of Old Faithful. I mean, there's Old Faithful and there's the hotel. And this hotel is completely and totally heated by underground water. So that underground water is coming into the hotel, and they have a radiant floor system, and they're using this same water in the floor as it passes back and forth. Now, the hot water that they use for showers and so forth is a closed loop system where they're pulling this water into a heat exchanger for fresh water that's coming in, and then they take the heat out of this water and put it into the shower water. So this water doesn't actually touch anybody, but this does go underneath here. This water actually travels underneath the floor here for this hotel. And a lot of the houses around here are also doing the same thing. They don't have to go very deep to extract this because the crust here is very, very thin, and they can actually use the water. Now, this water has high, like you say, contaminants. When I'm thinking contaminants, I'm thinking high mineral content. So if you have any kind of copper pipes or anything like that, then you're going to have some decay in there very quickly. Sulfur is enormously high in this. As a matter of fact, if you've ever been to Yellowstone National Park at all, I mean, you cross over the gates and immediately smell sulfur, just huge amounts of sulfur. So that would be an open loop system. Now, using it in Florida, I don't know how we're going to get hot water from Florida, groundwater. You could use it as a cooling system, but I haven't seen that, and I'm not familiar with that at all. One thing about his
that all connected to the same
what's that
system? All that is connected to the same system across the different buildings?
Yes.
It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Now, Yellowstone, all of this is connected, but now when you get out here and these are not connected, these probably are still connected. They may not be to the same pump system. They may have a separate pump system on each of these. These are, some of these are residential houses for workers that, rangers and so forth like that are there. And I don't know that they're on the same system that the hotel is. I would say that they have their own pump.
But it all comes from that same source, though.
Oh yeah. Because I mean, this is and if you ever go to Yellowstone, man, there's just geysers upon geysers upon geysers upon hot springs everywhere. Let me see something. Yellowstone. I don't know if this is going to show me anything. Let's see. Changing those names again.
Yeah, I had a really high mineral content in my well and had to replace all the copper piping with PEX.
Yeah. So here's Yellowstone, and these are all hot springs. Yellowstone is a caldera, which is it's the world's largest volcano. No, I didn't spell that right. Well, maybe that was the geyser map. I don't know. But anyway, I mean, so in this little area here, there's just tons of different places. And so there's that caldera boundary. So this is the mouth of the volcano there. And even outside of it, you've got Mammoth Hot Springs is enormous. I mean, that's, why do they call it Mammoth, for God's sake? So it's huge and stinks. Oh my God, does it stink? That all of this is sulfur deposits that you're seeing there, sulfur and other types of minerals. But I mean, this thing is enormous. So, and it's really cool. If you haven't ever been out there, you need to go. It is an eye-opening event for sure. What I wanted to go back to on this a minute. So let's say that we're using a closed loop system. Like Danny was saying, what we have is we have gases that go through here for an HVAC system. Let me go back. I think I've seen it. Yeah. So we have this, like we have in a regular home that has a heat pump. We have gases that run to an external pump, and they either in the summertime they dump heat energy into the air, and in the wintertime, they extract heat energy out of the air. So, you know, like Sunday morning, or excuse me, Monday morning, it's supposed to be super cold. I mean, you know, well digger's ass cold. So there, you know, the heat pump, there's, after you get down to a certain temperature, you can't extract any more heat out of the air because there's just none there. It's all frozen. So that's why you don't see heat pumps in the north. So if we had a geothermal system, then, you know, after we get so deep in the ground stays a constant 50 degrees, then we have heat energy in the ground, and we can pull that heat energy out and run it across some air, and then we can distribute the hot air through the building and do it that way. So that's one of the reasons that this is, you know, more energy efficient, is because we're using a constant temperature of 50 degrees. In the summertime, the temperatures, you know, we don't turn the air conditioner on until it gets 70 plus, and the ground is cooler than the air that's in the house. Well, in the wintertime, we're trying to extract heat molecule or heat energy out of the ground, and it's still a constant 50 degrees, which right now it's 49 degrees at my house outside, and that's still warmer, and I would be able to extract more heat out of the ground than I would be out of the air at this point. So that's why these are most best suited. Again, water in a pond type situation, if you used a closed loop system in a pond loop, this water down deep is going to stay a constant temperature, but you wouldn't want to have it real close. So,
Water,
you know, what's that?
Said even though the water at the top may be frozen in the winter.
Yep. I mean, that's how fish still live. You know, they live because this water down here is still it's not frozen, you know. So we're even up in Canada, when they, you know, some of these ponds and lakes up there, they freeze over completely where you can drive a concrete truck out on them. We're talking, you know, 3 to 4 feet of ice, but underneath it, you know, the deeper you get, of course, it's, you know, at some point, I don't know what it is. I know in ground it's 50 degrees plus or minus. In water, you get so deep and it gets colder, but it never reaches freezing. So I don't know what that temperature is, but at a certain depth, it is constant.
Oh, question. What's the diameter traditionally of those coils under the ground?
The ones I've seen are usually about a 2-inch, 1.5-inch to 2-inch pipe. And you got 2 pipes that go all the way down and have a very special connector at the bottom. They get, you know, welded together, you know, plastic welded together so that there's not a seam to bust way down at the bottom.
Yeah, I read about usually about plus or minus 2 inches, maybe up to 4 inches. So
Okay.
And what material are they using?
Usually just sealed.
I mean, is it plastic or metal or what?
Just depends. Usually it's plastic, I think, just regular
Okay.
plastic.
Yeah, the geothermal water furnace system, they've used this really high impact ABS plastic that, you know, is supposed to deal with any vibrations that might rub against rocks or anything like that.
Yeah, I built a dog kennel with a heated floor, and we used the high test. It worked well.
Covey, what's the lifespan of these systems? Do you know?
Typically I've heard of systems that can probably last up to 50 years, but most of them don't really last that long. They could probably last maybe before it starts breaking down and requires major maintenance. I'd say probably around 25 years-ish, 30 years.
Okay.
Yeah, the contractor promised me 30 years.
Usually they come with like a 30-year warranty or something with it. So.
Okay, very good. Any other questions for Covey?
Covey, did you find any information about the tax credits available for this? I know that we've had a lot of different tax credits that have been available at different times, and what's available now to kind of cut down on your install costs.
No, I have not heard anything about that.
At one point, we had a very large tax credit for geothermal that would cover almost a quarter of installation costs, I think.
Well, that would certainly be nice.
I've seen some people take advantage of that too, and kind of call their entire basement a mechanical closet just so they could write off part of that cost.
Danny, right here is if you go to NC State, the Clean Energy Technology Center, they have a system called Desire, and you can go in and you can search different programs in the state, in the what tax credits you get from the federal. This is a whole huge database of information that you just kind of got to go weed through it. Some of the searches are nice. They come up very, very good. Other ones you got to kind of dig a little bit deeper. So
I'm familiar with having to dig on that website. I've spent some time there before.
So yeah, I mean you can actually search it by state, federal, and so forth. So it's a really good website if you've got the time to deal with that.
I just
One
did.
other anecdote is that had a client use the loops under his driveway so that his driveway would melt in the winter and he wouldn't have to go out and shovel his snow. I thought that was a good one.
I've seen that a lot, actually, especially around New York, Rochester, New York.
I just did a quick DuckDuckGo search, and here it says the federal tax credit allowed homeowners initially 30% of the amount they spent on purchasing and installing it. It currently stands at 26% throughout 21 and 22, and it's going to decrease. Oh, it's going to decrease again in 2023. And they said you can fill out a form and you can declare it on your federal income taxes.
Yeah.
But Danny, how long have you been working with geothermal heat pumps?
I had a number of clients in Georgia, but that's it's really still only a small percentage of the total number of homes. And in those situations, I was not doing any of the install. I was just working on homes that had those systems.
In Georgia, and they were all closed loop?
They were all closed loop, yeah, and mostly all vertical. It was easier to run vertical piping. I had one client do a geothermal with a desuperheater loop, radiant floor, a solar hot water, and ran all of that through an on-demand gas water heater. It was like he had 3 different ways of heating his water in his house. It was belts, suspenders, and extras. So
yeah, some people do use that energy for like radiant heating, cooling too, like keeping their driveways or sidewalks heated too, so the snow melts. I think Eric was just talking about that.
Yeah, and that's why those having separate storage tanks and separate condensers, like Brian mentioned, it happens. You get one system for your radiant floor and one system to deal with your hot water, and it ends up being a lot of equipment, but like you said, that initial investment does pay off, and eventually you could even be making money on it by the time you've repaid your investment.
Right, yeah, the water heater and the HVAC system do share the same heat source though.
Yeah, the desuperheater loop, and you got a thermal storage tank for that.
Yep.
Okay, good. Any last questions?